Story 1. It was 11 a.m. when I woke, but something felt off. The air was thick with a strange stillness, the kind that makes you question whether the world is really moving at all. As I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the lingering fog of sleep, I glanced at the clocks around my room. The one on the wall, the alarm clock by my bedside, and even the little digital one on the dresser, they all showed different times. It wasn't just a few minutes off here and there, they were all drastically wrong. A chill crept up my spine. My heart began to thud in my chest as I sat up quickly, panic starting to rise. I grabbed my phone, glanced at it, barely 5 a.m. It didn't make sense. I scrambled out of bed and moved through the house, checking each clock I passed. The kitchen clock read 5:26. The microwave? 3:58, the hallway clock read 7:32, but my phone had just told me it was barely 5 a.m. I felt a chill run through me, a tightness in my throat as I stood frozen. My mind raced. How could every clock be wrong? I rushed to the living room, where above the couch, there it was, the only clock that seemed to be working properly, showing the exact time I expected. 5 a.m. It seemed almost too perfect. I stared at it, my mind whirling with confusion, trying to make sense of what was happening. Why was everything else out of sync? What was I missing? The more I thought about it, the more I began to feel like I was losing control, like the house, which had always been my safe place, was now playing some cruel trick on me. Was I losing track of time? Or was something far more sinister happening? I didn't know, but I had to get out of there. I needed air. I stepped outside, the cold morning air hitting my face like a slap. For a moment, I felt like I could breathe again, like maybe the outside world could offer some clarity. The sun was barely up, casting a faint glow over the neighborhood as I stood on the porch. I pulled out my phone and checked the time again, 5 a.m. This made sense. It felt right. But then, as I looked back at my house, something made my stomach tighten. The living room clock, just moments ago, it had been working perfectly. Now, it was showing a different time altogether, as if it had jumped ahead by several hours. My pulse quickened as I turned back inside. What was happening? I checked each clock again, still wrong, all of them, except for the one in the living room. The one that was now different. Frantically, I moved from room to room, trying to reset everything, but no matter what I did, the clocks refused to cooperate. Time, it seemed, had become unhinged. The more I tried to make sense of it, the more my head spun. Was I losing my grip on reality? Was there something I wasn't seeing? By the time the sun was fully up, the clocks were showing times that made no sense at all. The microwave had jumped forward 2 hours. The hallway clock had fallen back, almost as though it were mocking me. I felt dizzy, like I was trapped in some warped dimension where nothing was quite right. I considered calling someone, anyone. But the thought of trying to explain what was happening felt more absurd than anything else. I grabbed my phone again, desperate to reach out to a friend, but when I unlocked it, I froze. The screen displayed a message, eerie and cryptic. It simply read, "Time is watching you." My hands trembled as I stared at it, reading it over and over, trying to make sense of the chilling words. Who would send something like that? Why? But there were no answers. Only an overwhelming sense of dread that settled over me like a dark cloud. My home, which had always been a place of comfort, now felt suffocating, like it was playing a twisted game with me. I went back to the living room, staring at the clock again, as if it held the answers to all of this. But no. The time had changed once more, slipping ahead without warning. My mind was unraveling. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Time itself, was messing with me. I stepped outside again, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. But as I looked up, the sky had shifted. The day seemed to be slipping away far too quickly, faster than it should have. My heart raced as I tried to focus, to grasp some sense of control. But the more I tried, the more I realized that nothing made sense anymore. The living room clock, the one that had been the only constant, the one I'd clung to like a lifeline, was now completely still. No ticking. No moving hands. It had stopped. And in that moment, the terrifying truth hit me like a hammer to the chest. I wasn't just losing track of time. Time was losing track of me. Story 2. It was late, the kind of quiet night that feels thick, heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. I was sitting at my desk, flicking through old photos on my phone. The glow of the screen was the only light in the room, casting soft shadows on the walls. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just reliving memories, maybe reminiscing a bit too much. But then, something strange caught my eye. It wasn't an old picture at all. At first, I thought it was just a blurry shot or some odd angle, but then I looked closer, and my blood ran cold. It was a picture of me. I didn't recognize the place in the background. It was a dark alleyway, bathed in the eerie, flickering light of a single street lamp. The pavement was wet, the shadows deep, as if the street had been abandoned for years. And there I was, standing right in the middle of it, holding a crumpled piece of paper in my hand. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the address written on that piece of paper. It was mine. I froze, staring at the image as if time itself had stopped. There was no way I had ever been in that alleyway. I never went that far from home, not once. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, a glitch, but everything in the photo looked real, the way my jacket creased at the sleeve, the way my hand was curled around the note, even the way my eyes seemed to be staring directly at the camera. It was like I knew someone was watching me. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest, my breath quickening as I checked the photo's metadata, praying for some kind of clue. But nothing. No timestamp, no location data. Just a blank file, as if it had appeared out of nowhere, almost like it was meant to torment me. I swiped my fingers across the screen, desperate for an explanation, but nothing made sense. A cold unease settled over me, as though someone was playing some twisted game, or worse, had been stalking me for who knows how long. I couldn't shake the feeling that this photo wasn't taken recently either. The alley looked decayed, the way I was dressed felt out of place. Yet the address written on that piece of paper, my address, was clear as day. The address I was sitting in right now. Alone. In my room. I felt a cold sweat prick at my neck. My hand trembled as the full realization hit me, someone had been here, and I had no idea who they were, or how they'd gotten so close. In a daze, I stood up, moving toward the front door. Maybe it was some sick prank, a coincidence. But when I stepped outside, everything froze. The street was eerily quiet, unnervingly still. The kind of silence that felt wrong. I checked the yard, the corners of the porch, but there was nothing. Still, something tugged at the back of my mind, like I was being watched. I went back inside, locked the door, double-checked the deadbolt. My phone buzzed from the counter, making me jump. I looked at the screen. An unknown number. My stomach twisted into knots. I opened the message. I saw you. Panic surged through me. I could barely breathe. My hands were clammy as I tried to stay calm. Was it a stalker? A scam? A sick prank? I checked my social media, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary, no posts, no check-ins, nothing that could explain how someone knew where I lived. As the hours crawled by, the unease blossomed into full-blown anxiety. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind sent my heart into overdrive. I couldn't focus on anything, even the television flickering softly in the background. The walls felt like they were closing in. I kept checking the windows, pulling back the blinds just enough to peer outside. But all I saw was darkness. I tried calling a friend, just to hear a voice, but the line was dead. No dial tone. It was as if the world was disconnected. It was like I was trapped in some nightmare. The more I tried to reach out, the more isolated I felt. By midnight, I was desperate. Maybe a walk outside would clear my head. Maybe I just needed some fresh air, to stop feeling so paranoid. I grabbed my jacket and locked the door behind me. The night air was cold, sharp enough to make my breath visible in the darkness. But as I stepped off the porch, something caught my eye. There, at the end of the street, was a figure. It stood perfectly still, just beyond the reach of the street lamp, a shadow in the dark. I couldn't make out any details, but I felt its eyes on me, like it was staring straight into my soul. My heart pounded in my chest, and I froze. I couldn't move. I should have turned and run inside, but my body wouldn't obey. I just stood there, paralyzed, staring at that figure, wondering if it was the same one from the photo. The one who had been watching me. The one who had left the message. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the figure turned slowly and began to walk away, disappearing into the shadows. I didn't wait to see where it went. I bolted inside, locking the door behind me, my heart racing as I slid to the floor, trying to catch my breath. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew one thing for sure: whatever had been watching me, it was still out there. And I was not safe. The night dragged on in a blur. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I checked every lock, every window, every door. But no matter how many times I checked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting. Watching. The photo, the note, the message, it was all too real, and I couldn't escape it. When the morning light finally filtered through the curtains, I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed a bag, threw in the essentials, and fled. I left everything behind. My phone, my life, my memories. I had to get away, had to find somewhere safe. The figure was still out there, and whatever it wanted, I wasn't sticking around to find out. Story 3. I was sitting at my desk, finishing up some late-night work, when the sudden ping of an email alert broke the silence. It was from an old friend of mine, someone I hadn't heard from in years. I froze, staring at the subject line, "Be careful." At first, I thought it must be some kind of mistake. My friend had been out of my life for so long, and the sight of their name in my inbox made my heart skip a beat. I hesitated, fingers hovering above the keyboard, unsure of what I was about to uncover. I clicked on the email, my pulse quickening. The message was short, just a few lines of text, but the word struck me like a punch to the stomach: be careful. Don't trust anyone. I sat there, staring at the message, trying to make sense of it. The email address was theirs, but something wasn't quite right about it. It was almost the same as before, just a slight difference in the letters, barely noticeable, but enough to send a chill down my spine. My friend had passed away 2 years ago, after a long battle with illness. There was no way they could have sent this. My hands trembled as I checked the time stamp. It had been sent just minutes before I opened it. I tried to reason with myself: maybe their account had been hacked, maybe it was some kind of glitch, but deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. The room suddenly felt colder, the air thick and heavy as I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. I immediately contacted the email service provider, hoping for some logical explanation: maybe it was a glitch or an automated message. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. How could I have received this email now, of all times? I had deleted every trace of contact information from my friend's account after their funeral. There was no way this could have come from anyone else. The next day, I showed the email to my family, hoping they could offer some kind of explanation. They agreed it was strange, but none of them could offer any real answers. Some suggested it was a scam or a prank, but I knew better. It was too personal, too specific. It felt like a warning, like someone was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I tried to put it out of my mind, convinced that maybe I was just letting my imagination get the better of me. But the email lingered in the back of my thoughts, like a shadow I couldn't shake. And soon, strange things started happening. The lights in my house flickered at odd times, and I began hearing faint noises, footsteps in empty rooms, the soft creak of the floorboards when I was sure I was alone. My phone would randomly freeze, only to restart as if someone had tampered with it. Each time, the sense of dread deepened. It was like I was being watched, but I couldn't figure out by whom, or why. Then came the second email. It was from my friend's account again. This time, it was even shorter than the first. Just 3 words, "They're watching you." My stomach dropped, my skin prickling with cold sweat. Who was watching me? And why had my friend, someone who had been gone for years, been trying to warn me? Paranoia set in. I started locking doors more often, checking the windows before going to bed. Every little noise seemed amplified, and I jumped at every creak or rustle. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, gnawed at me, refusing to let go. I couldn't tell if I was going crazy, or if something more sinister was unfolding right in front of me. Then, one night, everything escalated. I was sitting in the living room, trying to distract myself with the TV, but the air felt thick, oppressive. My phone buzzed again. Another email. My heart pounded in my chest as I hesitated, knowing what was coming. I opened it. The message was brief, chilling, "Don't turn around." My body went cold. I froze, staring at the screen, my hands trembling. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I felt it, something, just behind me, lurking in the shadows. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the frantic beat of my heart. Time seemed to stretch on forever as I sat there, paralyzed by fear. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just overreacting. But every instinct screamed that something was there. Someone. Watching. The phone vibrated again, this time with an attachment. I opened it. A photo. A recent photo of me sitting in my living room, taken from behind. My blood ran cold. It was real. The clothes I was wearing, the way I was sitting, everything matched. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized that whoever had taken the photo was in my house, watching me. I couldn't take it anymore. I sprang from the couch, heart pounding in my chest, and rushed to the door. But it was locked. Panic surged through me as I tried the windows, but they were all shut tight, as if they had never been touched. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking, and bolted out of the house, desperate to escape. I ran down the street, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone there. But the street was empty. No one. Nothing. Just the silent stretch of pavement beneath my feet. I didn't return to the house for days. I stayed with a friend, constantly on edge, always looking over my shoulder. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, expecting another email. But it never came. Eventually, I returned to my house, but it was never the same. The air felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding a secret. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was still watching me. And I couldn't forget the words my friend had sent me. Be careful. To this day, I don't know who or what was behind it all. I don't know why they chose me, why they reached out in such a horrifying way. But I can't escape the nagging thought that the warning was real. I can't shake the fear that someone, or something, has been watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Story 4. I awoke with a sudden, violent jolt, my breath catching in my throat as I tried to orient myself. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with a palpable unease. My heart hammered in my chest, and the silence around me was suffocating. My eyes snapped open, and in the dim, suffused darkness, I saw it, him, sitting at the foot of my bed. A figure, motionless, just staring at me with an intensity that made the hairs on my neck rise. I froze, my mind struggling to make sense of what my eyes were telling me. His face was obscured in shadow, but I could feel his gaze. It pierced the darkness, a cold weight pressing into my soul. I blinked hard, trying to clear the fog that had settled over my mind, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. The bed was empty. The room was exactly as it should be, still, silent, untouched. I was left staring at the darkness, heart pounding in my chest, the adrenaline surging through my veins. Had I imagined it? My head spun as I scrambled to sit up, casting a frantic glance around the room. Everything seemed normal, too normal. There was no one, nothing out of place, but still, the feeling lingered. A cold, gnawing sensation in the pit of my stomach. It felt like I wasn't alone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet meeting the cold floor with a soft, unholy thud. My breath came in shallow, panicked bursts. I stood up, every instinct telling me to look, to check, to find something that could explain this. But there was nothing. No sign of anyone. No hidden figure in the corners. Just the echoing silence of a room that, on the surface, was entirely unremarkable. The door. I stumbled toward it, pressing my palm against the handle, turning it slowly, just to be sure. Locked. It had to be locked. I stood there for a long moment, my breath uneven, my hands trembling as I listened to the silence. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream. A bad one. My mind had to be playing tricks on me. But as I stood there in the quiet, the sensation of being watched, monitored, refused to fade. It wasn't a dream. It felt too real. I moved toward the window, parting the curtains just enough to peer outside. The street was empty. The night was deep, cold, silent. No movement, no life. Just the quiet that seemed to press down on everything. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling, someone was here. Someone was with me, hiding in the shadows, just beyond reach. I didn't know why, but I felt it in my bones. I needed to see myself. To reassure myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashed cold water onto my face, and stared into the mirror. The reflection was mine, pale, wide-eyed, but normal. Yet that lingering, suffocating unease clung to me, wrapped around me like a shadow that refused to leave. I glanced back toward the bedroom. My pulse quickened again, and I knew I had to check. Had to be sure. With hesitant steps, I returned to the room. The bed was made, the lights were off, everything in place. Yet there was something in the air. Something had shifted. Something had changed. The tension was suffocating, like a pressure pushing in on all sides. And then, creak, the unmistakable sound of weight shifting on the bed. I turned, slow, deliberate, my heart leaping into my throat, my breath quickening in panic. The bed was empty. The figure, that figure, was gone, but the noise was undeniable. The sound of someone moving, sitting there, in the place where the shadow had been. Something was there. I stepped back, my skin prickling with fear, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. My mind screamed that I was imagining it. That I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking violently as I tried to type a message to someone, anyone, to hear a voice, to remind myself that I wasn't losing my grip on reality. I waited, the minutes dragging on in agonizing silence. No response. I sent another message. Still nothing. The silence around me was suffocating now. It was like the room was pressing in, growing heavier with every passing second. I turned back toward the foot of the bed, half expecting to see the figure again, its unseen eyes staring into mine. But there was nothing. Just the silence. The oppressive, unyielding silence. I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. I bolted from the room, throwing open the door with a force that felt almost frantic. The hallway was just as silent, just as empty. But even in the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was following me. Watching me. I paced the house, my feet moving without thought, my mind spinning in chaos. What had I seen? What had I felt? Was it just my imagination running wild, or was there something truly sinister in that room? I couldn't make sense of it. I tried to reason with myself, to talk myself down, but the unease only grew, deeper, darker. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. Something had been in that room. Something had been watching me. I didn't return to that room that night. I stayed in the living room, my eyes darting toward every corner, every shadow, searching for something, anything, to make sense of what had happened. But there was nothing. Just the heavy, suffocating silence. And as the first rays of dawn began to creep in, I couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened that night was just the beginning. The figure might be gone, but the presence, the feeling, the watchful eyes. They were still there, lurking in the dark, waiting. Always watching. Story 5. It was a long, exhausting day at work when I finally pulled into my driveway, desperate to be home. As I walked up to the front door, I noticed something strange in the mailbox, an envelope sticking out at an odd angle. At first glance, it didn't seem like anything unusual, but as I drew closer, the absence of any name or return address caught me off guard. Just a plain white envelope with a neat, deliberate seal. My curiosity surged, but so did an unfamiliar unease that began to creep up my spine. I stood there, staring at it for a moment, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the weight of it, the complete anonymity, sent an irrational shiver down my back. My heart picked up pace, and despite every instinct screaming to turn away, I reached forward and pulled it from the box. It felt heavier than I expected, almost like there was more inside than just a simple letter. With a hesitant breath, I ripped open the flap and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I froze when I saw what was on it, a photo of my house, taken from the street. The picture was impossibly clear, as if the person who had taken it was standing right there on my lawn, watching me. The angle was precise, almost like they'd been carefully observing me for some time. I couldn't tell when the photo had been taken, but I recognized the subtle shift in the shadows, the angle of the sun casting eerie, long shapes across the yard. There was no message, no words of any kind, just the image. A cold shiver passed through me. My heart raced as the realization set in, I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been watching me. But who? And why? The picture felt like a warning, a silent threat that left my hands trembling as I scanned the yard, every inch of it now feeling foreign and unsettling. I looked up and down the street, but the quiet evening seemed to mock me. There was nothing out of place, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I wasn't alone. I flipped the picture over, hoping for some kind of explanation, but the back was just as blank as the front. A sickening wave of paranoia washed over me. My thoughts raced, what if this was just the beginning? What if someone had been watching me for days, or even weeks, waiting for the right moment? I hurried inside, locked the door behind me, and placed the picture down on the kitchen counter. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. I dialed the number I had hoped I would never have to call. The police. My heart hammered in my chest as I waited for the line to connect. When the officer finally answered, I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though every word felt like it was suffocating in my throat. They asked if I recognized the picture or had any idea who might have sent it. I shook my head, even though they couldn't see me. The officer's voice was calm, almost dismissive, telling me not to overreact and that they would send someone to check it out. But there was a note of caution in their voice that made my skin crawl. I stayed on the line, trying to steady my breathing, as I glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone standing there, just like in the picture. The night dragged on, hours slipping by in a suffocating silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. I checked every lock, every window. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. The next day, the officers arrived, 2 of them, polite but distant. They examined the picture and took notes, promising they'd investigate. Their words didn't reassure me, though. As they left, they advised me to keep my doors locked and to be cautious, but it was clear they didn't believe much of a threat existed. Still, their caution was there, and that left me more unsettled than I cared to admit. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every gust of wind, sent me jumping. I checked the locks again. And again. But the suffocating feeling that I was being watched refused to go away. Then, the next morning, I found it, another letter. This time, no photo. Just a single line of neat handwriting, "I'm closer than you think." A chill gripped my stomach, ice-cold dread pooling in my veins. My hands were cold as I gripped the phone to dial the police once more. They assured me they'd send someone over, but as I hung up, a horrifying thought gnawed at me. What could they really do? How could they protect me from someone who knew everything about me, someone who seemed to be getting closer by the day? Days blurred together in a haze of fear and paranoia. I started taking different routes when I left the house, hoping to throw off whoever might be watching. But no matter what I did, I never felt safe. Then one evening, it happened. I'd just returned home from a quick errand when I noticed something. As I walked up to the front door, I saw a shadow move across the window. It was quick, barely perceptible, but it was there. Someone was inside my house. My heart stopped. My hand froze on the doorknob. Was I imagining things? Was this the fear finally getting to me? No. I couldn't take the chance. I bolted down the stairs to the back of the house, scrambling to find the spare key. I barely managed to slide open the back door and slip inside. The air was thick with tension, too still, too silent. I called out, my voice trembling, but there was no answer. I moved slowly through the rooms, my heart pounding in my chest. I checked every corner, every closet, but found nothing. Nothing, until I reached the basement. A single fresh footprint. It was small, but it was unmistakable. Right in the center of the floor. Someone had been in my home. I backed away, panic flooding my mind. What was happening? Had I been living in a house with someone, watching me? I ran back to the front door, grabbed my phone, and called the police. But as I sat there, trembling, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, the words were unmistakable, "I've been here longer than you think." My blood ran cold. The room around me seemed to close in, as if the walls themselves were pressing in, trapping me. Was I living in a house with something, lurking in the shadows? Was I ever really alone? Story 6. I woke up one morning to a strange, unfamiliar number flashing on my phone. I didn't recognize it, but something about it sent a shiver down my spine. I clicked on the voicemail, desperate for some explanation, but all I heard was heavy, labored breathing, shallow, uneven, as though someone was standing right next to me, listening. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the screen, the weight of the moment sinking into my bones. I tried to convince myself it was just a wrong number or some glitch, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I played the message again, hoping for a different sound, a word, anything that might make sense of this creeping dread. But there it was, just the sound of breath, too close, too real. It felt like it was meant for me, like it was meant to rattle me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just some random call. That was no ordinary mistake. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Should I call the number back? Should I block it? My finger hovered over the screen, trembling with indecision. After what felt like hours, I decided to call back, driven by some urge to understand. The phone rang, the seconds stretching on, until finally, someone picked up. But there was no greeting, just that same, relentless breathing. My throat tightened, and cold sweat began to trickle down my back. I quickly hung up, my mind spinning in a dozen different directions. What was happening? Why was it just breathing? My thoughts were a whirlpool of confusion. The rest of the day passed in a fog, every little noise sending my heart into my throat. My phone buzzing made me flinch, and every creak of the house echoed like a warning. I couldn't escape the sensation that someone was watching, that I wasn't alone. And that breathing? It was still there, haunting me, a low hum in the back of my mind. I couldn't escape it. That night, I turned off my phone, hoping the silence would bring some peace. I climbed into bed, trying to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was overreacting. But no matter how hard I tried, every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified, 1,000 times louder in the dark. I told myself to sleep, but then, just as I was beginning to drift off, my phone buzzed again. I jumped, grabbing it before the sound could stop. It was the same number. My breath caught in my chest. I froze. I didn't want to hear that breathing again, but part of me knew I had to understand why this was happening. I played the voicemail. This time, the breathing was worse. It was frantic, almost desperate, as though the person on the other end was struggling to keep control. The sound filled my ears, making my pulse race. And then, just like that, the line went dead. I quickly blocked the number, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew this was far beyond coincidence. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next few days were a blur. I stayed on edge, checking my phone every few minutes, lowering the volume just in case. But the fear didn't go away. It clung to me like a shadow. Every moment felt like I was being watched, like someone was waiting for me to slip, to make the wrong move. A week later, the next message came. This time, there was no breathing. Just a whisper, soft, almost intimate. Barely audible, but unmistakable, "I'm right outside." I froze, the blood draining from my face. The words felt like a paralyzing force. I didn't want to look out the window, didn't want to confirm my worst fear. But my body was locked in place, stiff with terror. I wanted to run, to hide, but I couldn't move. Instead, I flipped every light on in the house, pacing from room to room, trying to convince myself it was just some sick joke. That night, I stayed awake, the lights blindingly bright, every window locked tight. The silence was deafening. Every small sound sent my heart into overdrive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, just outside my door. The next morning, I contacted my phone provider, desperate for answers. They said they couldn't trace the number without a more concrete threat. It felt like a dead end. I was trapped in my own home, a prisoner to the fear that clung to me like a second skin. The calls stopped after that, leaving me with an uneasy peace. But deep down, I knew the terror wasn't over. I would never be free of it. I'd gotten no answers. The breathing, the whisper, it haunted me. I couldn't scrub the images from my mind. Even when the phone was silent, I felt the weight of it, like someone was always watching, waiting for the moment I would let my guard down. I knew now, in my bones, that I would never be safe again. The fear stayed with me, a scar that no amount of time could erase. My phone, when it buzzed suddenly. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another message from a friend or maybe a notification. But when I glanced down, my stomach dropped. The text was brief, direct, and unnerving, "You shouldn't have opened that door." I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. The screen seemed to blur as the words sank in, slowly, like something cold creeping through my veins. I hadn't opened any door, at least not recently. The last time I'd touched the front door was earlier that morning when I stepped outside to grab the mail. I hadn't noticed anything out of place, nothing unusual. I looked around the apartment, half expecting someone to leap out from behind the furniture, to see an intruder lurking in the hallway. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint sounds of traffic outside, too far away to be comforting. I glanced back at the message. The sender was just a random string of numbers, no name attached. My fingers shook as I typed a response, "Who is this?" The word sent, but the message stayed read. No sign of life from the sender. The silence in the apartment felt suffocating, almost oppressive, like the air itself had thickened, holding its breath. The door. I kept thinking about it. That door I had opened this morning. Why did it feel so significant now? At the time, I hadn't given it a second thought, but now. I wondered if something had followed me inside. Something unseen, something that was fully aware of me. I scanned the room again, more carefully this time. No strange shadows, no hint of movement. The apartment was as still as it had been when I first sat down. Yet the feeling gnawed at me, growing stronger. I got up and locked the door, double-checking the deadbolt as if that small action could somehow banish the creeping dread that had taken root inside me. I made my way to the kitchen, trying to push the thought of that message from my mind. I turned on the stove, attempting to distract myself by cooking dinner, but every moment was punctuated by the whisper of unease. The message. The door. What was that text about? Who had sent it? What door were they referring to? I had barely sat back down when my phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. More chilling. You opened it, and now it's inside. The words seemed to pulse on the screen, like they were alive, writhing and crawling off the phone and into the room with me. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I felt my heart skip. I backed away from the phone, my breath catching in my throat. What did it mean? What had I let in? I looked around the apartment again, my eyes darting from corner to corner. This time, the silence felt heavier, like the space itself was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. The front door. The window. The hallway leading to the other rooms. Everything felt wrong. The stillness was suffocating, and I couldn't escape the growing terror in my chest. I had to leave. I grabbed my coat, rushing out into the cold night. The brisk air slapped my face, but it didn't clear the fog of fear that clouded my thoughts. I walked for hours, my mind a swirl of panic and confusion, but no matter how far I went, the dread never left. It clung to me, a shadow that wouldn't shake loose. When I finally returned to my apartment, it felt different. It wasn't just the silence, but the heaviness in the air, as though the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating me. I checked all the locks again, every window, every door, secure. But the moment I turned around, my phone buzzed once more. It's here. I didn't need to read it twice. The meaning was clear, and the moment I saw those words, I felt it, a presence. Something was watching me. A chill ran down my spine as the feeling settled over me, cold and suffocating. It was like someone was standing just behind me, their breath on my neck. I spun around, my heart racing, but the room was empty. The apartment, silent as ever, gave no sign of intrusion. Yet I knew, in the deepest part of my bones, that something had changed. I backed up toward the door, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts, none of them comforting. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but before I could, the lights flickered. The apartment was swallowed by an instant darkness, so complete, it felt like the very air had turned to pitch. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat like a drum. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to turn on the flashlight, but my hands shook so violently I could barely hold it. Finally, the light flickered on, and I scanned the room, no shadows, no movement, but the air was thick now, suffocating. There was something in it, something oppressive that pressed in on me from all sides. I couldn't stay in the dark. I ran for the front door, but as I reached for the handle, I heard it. A soft creak, like old wood bending under weight. I froze. Slowly, I turned around. There, in the doorway to the hallway, stood a figure. Tall, cloaked in darkness, but there was something about it, something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes, cold and calculating, boring into me. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat, and without thinking, I bolted toward the door. I wrenched it open, slammed it behind me, and ran. I didn't look back. I ran, as fast as my legs could carry me, until I reached the nearest neighbor's apartment. I pounded on the door, desperate for help, but there was no answer. The hallway was empty. The building was silent. I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering in my chest, the weight of the world pressing down on me. And I knew, deep in my gut, that whatever that figure was, it was still out there. Waiting. I haven't been back to that apartment since. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what that thing was. But one thing is clear, I should never have opened that door. Story 8. I had just come home from a long day at work, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. As I reached into my jacket pocket, I noticed the fabric felt slightly rough from being tossed in the laundry, nothing unusual, just the kind of thing you'd expect from a rushed morning. But then, something felt off. My fingers brushed against something paper-like. I pulled it out, and it was a small, folded note. I unfolded it slowly, heart racing with that unsettling sense of dread that often accompanies the unknown. The words inside, scrawled in sharp black ink, hit me like a physical blow. It's too late to leave now. My stomach dropped. I froze in place, feeling a cold chill wash over me. It was as if the air had suddenly thickened, suffocating me, pressing in on every side. My hands trembled as I gripped the note tighter, unable to understand why it was there or who would put it in my pocket. The message was clear, but its meaning was a complete mystery. Someone knew something about me, something I didn't know. A wave of panic began to wash over me as my mind scrambled to find any reason why this would happen. But nothing made sense. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that crawled up my spine, but it lingered, gnawing at me like a persistent shadow. I glanced around the room, half expecting someone to be hiding behind the curtains or lurking in the corners of the house. But everything was still, quiet. The house, which usually comforted me with its familiar silence, now felt wrong, like something unseen was watching me. I stood there for a long moment, rooted to the spot, the weight of the note in my hand growing heavier with each passing second. I finally moved, walking into the living room and dropping the note on the coffee table. I started pacing, my mind spiraling into a frenzy, but I couldn't piece anything together. I needed to talk to someone, but who? I grabbed my phone, scrolling through my contacts, but no one would understand. No one would believe how terrifying a simple note could be. My finger hovered over the screen, paralyzed by indecision. Then, I heard it. A faint tapping sound, like a knuckle gently knocking against wood. It stopped as quickly as it started, but my heart skipped a beat. I stood frozen, listening, waiting for something more, but the silence returned, thick and suffocating. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, but my instincts screamed that it was something else. Something wasn't right. I grabbed the note again, reading the words one more time. It's too late to leave now. The simplicity of it made it even more chilling. As if whoever wrote it knew that I had already crossed some invisible line. Then I heard it. This time, unmistakable. The creak of a floorboard from upstairs, slow and deliberate, as if someone was walking across it. My blood ran cold. I stood there, frozen in place, holding my breath, listening, waiting for more. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but the note haunted me. It's too late to leave now. The words echoed in my mind, trapping me in place. With a trembling hand, I gripped the banister and crept up the stairs. Each step seemed to echo loudly in the dead silence of the house, as if the whole world could hear my every move. When I reached the top, I hesitated, listening carefully. The house was eerily quiet again, almost too quiet. I moved toward the hallway, glancing down both directions, but there was nothing there. I walked toward my bedroom, every nerve on edge, my hand shaking as I reached for the door. With a quick motion, I swung it open, expecting to find something, someone, waiting for me. But the room was empty. The bed was made. The curtains were drawn. It looked like any other night. But the feeling, oh God, the feeling. It was like someone had been there, watching me, waiting for me to slip up. I backed away from the room, the walls closing in around me, the air thick and suffocating. I couldn't stay there anymore, but where could I go? What if someone was still inside the house? What if they were waiting for me, hiding just out of sight, watching my every move? Suddenly, a loud bang from downstairs shattered the silence, followed by muffled voices, too quiet to make out, but unmistakable. My heart leapt in my chest, and adrenaline surged through my veins. I ran downstairs, every step a desperate race for survival. I reached the bottom just in time to hear the front door slam shut, rattling the windows. I rushed to the door, my hand reaching for the knob, only to find it locked from the outside. Panic set in as I tried the door again, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Someone had been here. Someone had been watching me. I needed to get out. But the house, it felt like a trap. Every window was shut tight, every door locked. No way out. The note was all I could think about now, its words burning in my mind, it's too late to leave now. Just as the walls seemed to close in, I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from the kitchen. It grew louder, closer, like something, or someone, was dragging something heavy across the floor. I froze again, my body tense with fear, every instinct screaming at me to hide, to run. But there was nowhere to go. I crept toward the kitchen, my steps slow and deliberate, not daring to make a sound. I peered around the corner, and my heart stopped. There, in the center of the room, stood a figure. Their face was obscured by a mask, and in their hand, they held something shiny, something reflecting the dim light of the room. I stepped back, my pulse racing, panic clawing at my chest. What did they want? Who were they? But before I could make a move, the figure stopped, turning to face me. I could feel their gaze even through the mask, cold, calculating. Then, they spoke, their voice muffled but clear, it's too late to leave now. And just like that, I knew. There was no escape. Story 9. The night had already settled into an eerie stillness, the kind that wraps itself around everything and refuses to let go. I had been sitting on the couch, watching the rain gently fall outside, when I first felt it, the cold air, brushing against my skin. It was strange, because I hadn't opened any windows. At least, I was certain I hadn't. I glanced around, confusion spreading across my mind. Maybe I had forgotten to close one earlier. But no, there was no way. I was alone. I had been alone all day, and the house had been silent, almost too silent. I stood up, my heart already beginning to thump harder in my chest, and walked toward the windows. That's when my breath hitched in my throat. Every single window was wide open. The chill crept deeper into my bones. The house was supposed to be empty. There had been no one here all day. I moved from window to window, closing them one by one, but the dread that clung to the air didn't lift. It only grew heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. The wind outside howled through the open panes, amplifying the silence inside, making everything feel unbearably still, like the calm before a storm. I stood frozen for a moment, my gaze fixed on the windows, my mind whirling. The rain had stopped, but the air felt thick and damp, as if the very atmosphere in the house had been altered. Then, it came, a sound so faint at first, I thought I had imagined it. Footsteps. Soft, almost imperceptible, like someone walking on the creaky, old wooden floor upstairs. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, drawing closer. I hadn't heard anyone enter the house, and I was sure I was alone. Was my mind playing tricks on me? No. The sound was real, getting louder, closer. I couldn't ignore it. I took a cautious step toward the stairs, my feet making barely a sound on the floor. The footsteps were louder now, undeniable, echoing through the empty house. My breath quickened, my pulse pounding in my ears as I reached the bottom of the stairs. I looked up into the darkness of the hallway above. The air was still, but the shadows moved. Just a flicker, something unnatural, something wrong. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step creaking unnervingly loud, as if the house itself was protesting my presence. The footsteps stopped. Just like that. Silence. My breath echoed in the empty space, the only sound in the house now. I checked each room, one by one. Empty. Silent. No one had been there. It was as if the house itself had swallowed whatever had been there before. I turned to leave the hallway, but then I saw it, the bathroom door, at the far end of the hall, slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it open. I approached, my heart racing. Each step seemed to take forever, and the closer I got, the more my anxiety clawed at me. I reached the door and pushed it open. The room was as it always was, cluttered, unkempt. But then, something caught my eye, something small, almost insignificant, but there, nonetheless. A wet footprint on the floor, near the sink. Fresh. Damp from the rain, still glistening with moisture. I crouched down, my mind racing with questions. How had it gotten there? I hadn't heard anyone. I hadn't seen anyone. And yet, there it was, proof that something, or someone, had been here. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the panic started to claw at me. I stood quickly, my pulse quickening. I had to leave. I had to get out. But just as I turned, something made me stop. A shadow. It was small at first, barely noticeable, but then it grew. It stretched, slowly, across the hallway floor. And it wasn't human. No, it didn't move like a person, not even close. It shifted unnaturally, bending and twisting in ways that didn't belong, like it was alive, watching me. My body went numb with fear, and I couldn't move. The shadow lingered, its presence thickening, suffocating. I finally snapped out of my trance and bolted down the stairs, my heart racing in my chest. The house felt colder now. Much colder. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I ran toward the front door, but it was locked. Panic surged through me. I couldn't find my keys. I searched frantically, opening drawers and cabinets, tearing through everything in sight. The walls seemed to close in on me, pressing tighter and tighter with every passing second. The air was thick, suffocating. I finally found my keys on the kitchen counter. My hand shook as I fumbled with the lock, praying it would open. I didn't dare look back as I pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold night air. I didn't look back. I never went back inside that house. I couldn't. And I never found out who, or what, had opened those windows. I don't know if it was someone playing a twisted game, or if it was something else entirely, something I couldn't comprehend. But the feeling that something had been watching me, never left. It clung to me, haunted me, long after I had left the house behind. Even now, sometimes, I can't shake the sense that whatever had been there is still waiting. Still watching. Just out of sight. Story 10. I walked into the kitchen, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee still hanging in the air, a comforting reminder of the routine that anchored me. But today, the house was unnervingly quiet, almost too quiet. I stood in the doorway for a moment, absorbing the stillness, trying to enjoy the peace of the morning. Yet, something about the silence unsettled me, a sense of unease that tugged at the edge of my consciousness. As I stood there, the kitchen bathed in soft morning light, my eyes drifted to the window. And that's when I saw it. My reflection. But I hadn't moved from the doorway. I hadn't taken a single step forward. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and a cold knot twisted in my stomach. The reflection, it wasn't mine. It stood perfectly still, in the exact place where I had just been, staring back at me. I blinked, trying to shake off the strange feeling. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or the weariness of the early morning, but no matter how many times I blinked, it stayed. The figure didn't move. It was me, but it wasn't. The face was blank, expressionless, unnaturally so. It wasn't mimicking my movements, wasn't following my gaze. I took a step forward, my legs trembling, the air in the room thick with tension. The reflection remained still. I stopped. My breath caught, and I could feel my heart pounding harder in my chest. The longer I stared at that unmoving figure, the more my stomach twisted in anxiety. I couldn't tear my eyes away. My instincts screamed at me to turn and leave, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I reached out, almost involuntarily, as if my hand could somehow break the unnatural stillness of the reflection. The moment my fingers neared the glass, I heard it. A faint sound, like a breath, warm and close, right behind me. My spine stiffened, and I whirled around, heart hammering in my chest. But there was nothing. Nothing in the kitchen. No one. The room felt eerily empty, the silence now suffocating. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was the light or some strange optical illusion. But a dark, gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach told me that wasn't it. I turned back to the window, desperate for the reflection to change, to stop staring at me like that. It didn't. The figure in the window stood motionless, its face, my face, staring back at me with a look I couldn't quite place. It felt wrong, like a piece of my soul had been twisted. My pulse quickened. I took another step toward the window, my body shaking with uncertainty, but still, the reflection didn't budge. The air in the room seemed heavier now, oppressive, like something was closing in around me. I reached out again, fingers trembling as they brushed against the cool glass. And then it happened. The reflection finally moved, but not in the way I expected. It smiled. A wide, twisted grin that stretched unnaturally across its face, like something that didn't belong. My blood turned to ice. That smile, it wasn't mine. It wasn't my face. It was wrong. I staggered back, my heart racing in terror, my body trembling. I wanted to scream, to run, but my throat was tight, my breath shallow. My mind screamed at me to leave, to get out of the kitchen, but my feet wouldn't move. I stood there, locked in place, unable to tear my eyes away from the reflection. It stayed there, frozen, still wearing that terrible, unnatural smile. I tried to shout, but no sound came. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. It felt as if the very air around me had turned heavy, as if I were choking on it. I reached for the door frame, my hands shaking, desperate to break free from the oppressive weight that had settled over me. But just as my fingers touched the wood, something caught my eye. The reflection in the window. It had moved. Not in the way I had, but in the instant before I turned, just a fraction of a second, it stepped out of its place, out of sync with me. I whipped around, my body frozen in pure terror. The kitchen was empty. The reflection, it was gone. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, eyes darting around the room, searching for some explanation. But there was none. The kitchen felt different now. Colder. The walls seemed to press in, suffocating. That smile, the smile that didn't belong, lingered in my mind, its twisted, unnatural grin burrowing into my thoughts. Had I imagined it? Was it just a trick of the light? But deep down, I knew the answer. No. It wasn't a trick. Something had happened. Something I couldn't explain. I spun around, wanting nothing more than to leave the kitchen, to escape the lingering memory of what I had just seen. But as I stepped into the hallway, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. There I was, standing perfectly still, staring back at me. But something behind me, something dark, shifted in the shadows. Something that hadn't been there before. A chill ran down my spine,